Welcome to Happily Ever After is just the beginning. Keeping your relationship not just together, but happy, and we mean truly happy, is part art and part science. You've come to the right place. Here's your host, Lesley Dories.
There's a pretty common belief that children are not permanently impacted by the divorce of their parents. Now, under the best of circumstances, the impact can be minimized. But as the child of divorce and a couples therapist and coach for 20 years, I warn parents to believe this fallacy at their peril. Parents rarely ask their children about the divorce, and even if they do, children are rarely completely honest. Children want their parents to be happy, and the full impact of the divorce on their own romantic relationship won't be felt for years. But it will be there. And it tends to go one of two ways. Either there's absolutely no desire to get married ever, or if they actually do get married, the intent is to never, ever, ever, never, ever get divorced, no matter how bad it gets. But what if there's an alternative? What if there is a way not to go down the same path as your parents? Well, that's what my guest, journalist Alexandra Frost, found. She found one, and she's here to share it. So, Alex, thanks for being on the show and sharing what has become a pretty common experience for a lot of people.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Lesley. I'm very excited. Yes, definitely common now.
Yeah. So it's like I came across your piece at Reader's Digest website entitled, "My Parents Got Divorced After 7 Years. Here's What I'm Doing Differently." And, it resonated with me since I was also determined to do it differently than my parents. And you mentioned the 7 years and how it might have related to having kids. So can you talk about the importance of kid-proofing a marriage?
Sure. I have 3 sons under age 5, so within our 8 years of marriage, we've had quite a handful of kid experience early on. So it definitely has impacted both getting closer and also having more challenges. I think conversations are more challenging to have just from the physical noise around the house. And so that's always a natural barrier to communication right there. So I think kid-proofing the marriage just really came down to, for us, carving out time. I mean, we hear about date nights and think, oh, yeah, we'll do that sometime, but really being intentional about creating date nights as often as it's good for that marriage. So, I mean, we'd had friends who would do it monthly, and we're like, that's not really enough. Like 3 kids that are all that little is really a full-time thing. So we've switched to weekly date nights. And also just carving out time throughout the week, even if it's not an official date night, where we can just have an uninterrupted conversation. So those are some things that we've tried to do to kid-proof, but it's a task for sure.
Well, it is, and anybody who's listened to my show knows my feelings about this, that especially we are in a very kid-centric society, and we're never supposed to do anything that disappoints our children, and we're always supposed to be at their beck and call. And in reality, if we do that, and bless you for having 3 boys within like,
they're fun. Yes. Thanks.
It's really hard, and especially because we're told, oh, they have to be in all these activities and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And the thing that really gets put on the back burner is the marriage. And we've actually, in my field, they've actually done studies that show that marital satisfaction takes a hit when kids come on the scene. And any parent will tell you,
I have read those studies. Yes, I agree. I do think it's definitely difficult, but whenever I read those, I get a little agitated because I think they discount how much closer you also get, going through this process together. So I think it's just if people are turning inward or outward when those extra stressors appear. So, but yeah, the kid-centric society thing is so true. I know what you're talking about.
Well, and I kind of jumped into this because I actually didn't give you a chance to talk about why the 7 years and why the kid-proofing your marriage, because that's actually very specific to what happened in your parents' marriage, isn't it?
It is. It's so ironic. And they even went on to have additional divorces, some of which struggled at the 7-year mark, with subsequent spouses. So I've always been a little scared of that whole 7-year itch. I mean, I think it was a Marilyn Monroe movie back in the day and kind of a myth, but also, I mean, it seemed to have some truth in my family. So I always was like, all right, if we can get to year 8, it's going to be fine. But then some of the research in the article talks about it being bumpier, towards the year, I think it was like 3 or 4 in the marriage actually. But yeah, the 7-year itch, I think is just when you start to kind of look at each other and go, okay, where are we going from here? A lot of people have already had kids or are starting to have kids and feel the stress of having little kids especially. And like you said, they start to run around to activities and things like that. We've kind of limited how many activities we've had our kids do, even though they are pretty young. So we'll see if we're able to keep that going as they move into their, school-aged years. But yeah, just with that many kids, trying to run to, 6 different activities a night is definitely going to take a toll. So.
Right. And my husband and I stopped it too because we never wanted to be outnumbered. And,
yeah.
And we did exactly the same thing. We told the kids that you could be involved in a sport and an art each, but that was it. And when my son to this day, he's now grown and as my husband likes to say, off the payroll. But he tells stories about that we made him stop playing soccer. I said, no. You got to the point where you were so good in soccer and baseball, we made you choose because we weren't going to be like driving all over creation.
Right.
You had to choose, and you chose baseball.
Yeah.
So that's, but it is.
I understand that.
Yeah. And we do know in studies, we've shown that there are peaks and valleys for the health of relationships. And of course, when we have anybody who's had a newborn, it's like, oh my gosh.
Oh gosh. We call it the fog. We call it the 6-month fog. We've named it. And we're like, okay, if we can get through the 6-month fog, I read about that in the article, like we're going to be fine. But yeah.
And then, and so relationships generally so it's probably anywhere from a year to maybe that 3-year mark where people are talking about what, is this going to work? Do we want to have children? They're in that phase, and so they might split up then. And then it seems to be like at the 7 or 8 year mark, which is, we maybe have had a couple of kids and grown apart, and and then the other big bump is like year 25, which is like, oh, the kids are out of the house now. Who are you?
Right. Yes, definitely.
And so you talk about this, and I think it's so important. And so other than having, we talked about kids being hit to a marriage, you actually mentioned another one, which it's funny because I was talking to a client this morning, and this came up, and I went, oh, I'm going to be talking about this afternoon. You mentioned another challenge, which is boredom. So what is that about?
I was actually recently talking to a teenager. She was around 18, and she's like, how do you pick a spouse that you're going to have fun with for the next 100 years? I'm like, well, first of all, you'd be 118 years old, but not the point. So I do think that's something everyone fears in marriage, and we definitely did in the beginning. And I think that basically what's worked for us is just seeking out, if the partner is interested in a certain hobby, is there a way that we can also engage in that and take interest in each other's hobbies? And also I think people hear hobbies are like exciting date nights and are intimidated by, oh, we have to plan this elaborate rock climbing adventure and have dinner at this restaurant that we've never been to that's 40 minutes away and whatever else. And I think that I just think that standard is too difficult to uphold. So maybe just smaller goals have worked for us. Okay, we're going to just go to a movie because we know we both enjoy that. So again, maybe we're just in that survival mode, but kind of just, changing the boredom by trying to do different things, even if it's not super out of the box or a really high standard date, I guess. But I do think some people after a while are able to pursue some of those other things just more advanced adventures, and some people like to travel. So I think all of those can help, but also it's just, for us, it was just picking someone that we're friends with to marry as opposed to super romantical love, because just in the end, after that kind of dies out, I think we just enjoy sitting around on the couch and it not having to be a major production. So that's kind of what I told the 18-year-old girl I was talking to is like, pick someone you're friends with because, when the hormones stop flying, it's, that friendship and that ability to just converse, I think, helps to combat the boredom.
Well, and I love that you put this in because we actually do know that human brains are hardwired for new. And this is why our phones are such a challenge because we can have new. We literally have new in our hands every moment of the day. We can get new. And the other thing that research shows is that when we experience new with somebody else, it creates a bond. And so you're talking about doing these things, and you're right. I mean, I think people do get intimidated by the whole concept of, oh my gosh, we have to do a date night. And I tell people, especially parents of young children, you never have to leave the house. You can actually have a date night within your four walls. It's just concentrated time where you guys are focusing on each other. So whether it's playing a board game, which I know, my kids are like, board games are all the rage now, which I think is great. That's fun. Whether it's a board game or watching a movie or cooking together, it's like, but it's like you said, and I love the idea of what you said about if one of you has a hobby or an interest, is there a way to expand it so that it can encompass both of you? Because I know a lot of times people get into that thing of, that's my husband's thing and I don't really like it, or that's my wife's thing, and and it's like, and it's sort of like, and I get that there are some things that you don't, that it would be like. But
sometimes they haven't even tried it. I'm like, give it a shot. Maybe you guys, that will be your partner hobby as well, So.
Well, and that's something that one of my very, very first conferences that I ever went to, I sat in on this guy's seminar, and he was talking about things that he and his wife did together. It was like us things. It's like they went to the ballet as an us thing. They went to the baseball games as an us thing. It's what they did together, which, again, helps alleviate that boredom and some focus, and putting some focus on the actual relationship itself.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So this is Happily Ever After is just the beginning on webtalkradio.net. I'm Lesley Dories, and I'm talking with journalist Alexandra Frost about how to approach marriage if your parents were divorced. So we're now at third or fourth generations of divorce, and quite frankly, sometimes they're necessary, but often it's just a question of learned behavior. So if you're the child of divorce and concerned about not repeating the cycle, there's help. So I invite you to get in touch with me right away and take advantage of your free, no-obligation, Create Your Happily Ever After transformation session. You can send me an email at Lesley, Lesli, at foundationscoachingnc.com. That's FOUNDATIONS, coaching, N as in Nancy, C as in Charlie.com. Or you can give me a call at area code 919-924-0463. Again, 919-924-0463. So I want to get back to Alex and talking about this. And Alex, in your article, you mentioned something that I think is really, really critical, because you talk about the importance of not talking about the D word, not mentioning divorce. So since it's an option, why not talk about it?
Yeah, and I'm glad you spelled out what the D word was there. That's always very helpful. I think that, I think in premarital therapy, I took premarital therapy really seriously. It was not something required by our religion. I mean, it was recommended, but we ended up going to something like triple the sessions that we had, quote, had to. And I really liked it. I thought it helped to kind of undo some of the legacy of divorce my family had, and to make me feel more confident moving forward into the marriage. So at that point, the therapist had said this might be something to consider, is the idea of eliminating that as kind of an option, save abusive situations, of course, and he specified that. So if we ever felt like we were moving into an emotionally or physically abusive situation, obviously that is still an option for us. But other than that, it was all about the idea of the power of your words and what you're speaking over your own marriage. And if we end up in fights that result in ultimatums that involve the word divorce, that kind of creates that as an option in the back of our heads over the course of months and years. And basically, by eliminating that, we reframe what we think is possible, and that the only possibility for both of us is to pour back into the marriage when things are difficult. So I think that's why we originally started to not ever use the D word, and we haven't since at all, other than, I mean, it's not like we've never said the word divorce, but never in the context of something that we want to do or that is, you know, some sort of threat in the relationship or an option for either party, really. So that's kind of helped us in those ways.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting concept, because I was just reading, you know, I just was going through my emails, and one of my previous guests was talking about he and his wife and how they have it appears to have a perfect marriage, and basically what he said was a perfect marriage is two imperfect people promising to work it out with each other. And I thought, this is really great, because I mean, you know, and those of us who have gone through divorces as children, and I think you can probably argue even as a spouse, if you've gone through divorce, they're terribly painful. And I know that there's a lot of talk about, well, you know, we shouldn't call them failed marriages, because, you know, and people having divorce parties, and I'm going, this is not something to celebrate. And you know, and when our parents don't know how to resolve stuff, then that's what we see, that's what we experience, and it's like, and it's okay to say, you know, we're done, and then of course the kids get the you know, well, we love you, we just don't love each other anymore. So that basically tells kids that you know, you can stop loving somebody.
Right. Yeah, and that was a huge fear I had going into marriage is, you know, is that something that one day I'm going to feel towards this person that I feel so strongly for now? And is that something that they're going to feel just one day out of the blue? And are these things that can be predicted? Or, you know, I started spending sometimes a little too much time looking for these, like, prediction, like red flags. I mean, I remember being a teenager at one point, like, doing some school projects about divorce, and I had learned that statistically I was more likely to get divorced as a child of divorce. And so I think that kind of not infatuation with it, but definitely like research heavy way of coping with it is where that started. And then it kind of just veered into, okay, I'm going to have to eliminate this as an option, or I'm going to spend my whole marriage worrying about divorce, which is equally unhealthy.
Right. Well, and one of the things is when you say, okay, we're not going there, then it actually creates the opportunity to kind of think outside the box. Maybe because what we actually do is we do what we know, and you know, it's really hard to get out of our own heads and out of our own ways of seeing things. But if we're bound and determined that we're not going to give up, then so many more options can show up in terms of problem solving, or maybe just deciding, hey, this isn't a problem we actually really need to solve. Right.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think breaking down the bigger problem into the smaller, I mean, sometimes they're just even miscommunications that just lag on for years, and then it's like, is that how people end up at these places where they're not talking? And I definitely don't ever want to come off like this couldn't happen to me, because it can happen to anyone. But I definitely think, you know, dealing with those small miscommunications along the way have helped us a lot to kind of not have recurring fights that can't be solved to where we're like, oh, well, that's a 5-year-old problem or a 10-year-old problem. So.
Well, and you sort of actually mentioned the flip side, because you basically say not talking about divorce doesn't mean not talking or not addressing the challenges or having the tough conversations. Can you like kind of explain that a little bit or flesh that out a little bit? Because I know people go, well, we don't know how to do this.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, like I said, we did counseling in the beginning of marriage. We are doing it now. We call it preventative therapy. Sometimes we make it part of our date night. And whenever our, you know, friends hear preventative therapy, they're like, or hear marital therapy, they're like, what's wrong? Are you guys okay? And I'm like, are you okay? You should be doing this too, because it's great. And some of, like I said, the fights that you just can't resolve over time, I feel like that's really a space that you can work that out with the help of someone else who can listen, in a not biased way. But yeah, in that part of the article, I referenced Crucial Conversations, which is a book I really loved about creating safe spaces in which we can say tough things to each other. And that book really outlines how to do that. I liked it a lot. But I think that just creating a communication system with your partner that works for both of you, that's helped us. So just basic things like not saying how the other person feels and using I language, I feel, just all that, good old like therapy talk. But it really does over time create, a healthy communication system for us to use. So I think that's kind of helped. So we're definitely having the conversations, just not in the framework of this has to work or divorce, or that that word's being thrown around in any sort of casual way.
Right. And unfortunately, sometimes it does. And it's really hard to feel secure when your partner is like, oh, well, because my ex-brother-in-law used to do this. It's like, well, when we're divorced, and it's like, oh, my God.
Yeah, that's like the opposite of that safe space for sure. Like, it's hard to have any conversations within that. But I know people go through that, and that sounds really difficult.
Well, and I love the idea, and of course, because I do this for a living, I always love it when people say, be proactive about this, because we actually do know what works. And, and learning how to have those hard conversations in a way that minimizes the hurt and, because it's like, I always tell people, you can't completely avoid ever being hurt. But whether or not somebody is intentionally hurting you versus, oh, here's something that we have to talk about and it's going to be hard and feelings are going to get a little bruised, but it's okay because we love each other.
And I think in marriages you're so fired up by all the old hurts that, it takes is one thing and then everyone's derailed. So kind of having those frameworks for conversations. I mean, one thing that we've been doing is trying to categorize how big a problem is by using time words that are accurate. So instead of me saying, you do this all the time, just, hey, I've noticed in the past, whatever it is, an actual time frame, like, hey, I've noticed for the past few hours you've been in kind of a funk, like is something going on, as opposed to over categorizing and, making hyperboles about time. So that's been kind of helpful to both of us, I think. Or
even the flip side of assuming that whatever's wrong has to do with you. And yes, I mean, I loved your comment.
Yeah, and asking that question is so important. What is going on instead of assuming it's me. That's been really hard for me in particular, is just kind of, going back to the question instead of assuming that I know the reason. So those are all things that I think, we could all work on.
Yeah. Well, and in the article you talk about very openly about doing premarital work, and it sounds like you're still doing it, which of course making it through the kid years I think is definitely something that everybody can use help with. But we actually signed up for premarital counseling again pretty recently, like maybe a couple of months ago, and we were expecting a fourth baby, which we miscarried, and thank you. And basically, we were like, okay, let's prepare for this newborn fog. And it was so cool because we actually ended up really benefiting from the, premarital counseling through the miscarriage. And it's something that we never saw coming, but it really illustrated the whole point of preventative counseling is, okay, we have this relationship set up with a trusted person to where when something comes out of the blue and we need to talk about it, it's already there. I think that some people see therapy as, okay, if we ever get to that point, we'll do it. And I just think that's too late. I mean, I think it would be great if we all kind of just did it as a preemptive, building the relationship, learning the framework for talking. Then when something happens, like the miscarriage was, difficult for both of us on personally and on the marriage, then it's already set up and we can bring it to that space that we've deemed a safe space. Well, I'm going to tell you, you're preaching to the choir here on that one. But,
you know all this.
I do. But interestingly, you mentioned a specific relationship. You mentioned a specific question your counselor asked you that you claimed was relationship changing, and I loved the question. And can you share it?
Oh, sure. It was an awful day in my life. Yeah, she was like, "What would it be like to live with you?" And I must have been ragging on my husband for something, and she just flipped the tides, and I just thought, oh, man, not that good.
Right.
So, just once we start to look in a not egocentric way at the world and think about what would we be like as a spouse, all these great things about my husband appeared suddenly. Like, wow, he's much quicker to apologize than I am. And if I do something kind of grouchy, he lets it go quickly. And I don't do those things, and, I'm working on those. So I think that just considering what we're bringing to the table is in itself a great divorce prevention technique is, instead of what are they doing for me, what are they not doing for me? Like, well, what's it like to live with you is kind of a humbling question for sure.
Well, and, and this is one of the challenges because I will tell people when we are in a relationship, we've got a built-in scapegoat, and it's just that. It's like I can point out all the things that maybe my partner isn't doing, quote unquote, right, or the way I would want, or whatever, or I'm just having, I'm just in that place of, just whining and moaning and complaining about my partner. But it's really tough. It's like, oh, now I got to look in the mirror. It's like, and. And
there's a funny meme recently. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Sorry. There was a funny meme recently about successful marriage being about all the things you don't say. And I just think that's so true in this case is that really that big of a deal that I need to make it into a whole fight, or is it just a preference and something I have to get used to by, just living with someone? So.
Well, and that's, and to me that is, and I've said this before, that to me the biggest challenge to marriage is you're two different people trying to form a life together. Now what?
Yeah.
And, and it was funny because I was with my sisters not terribly long ago, and we were discussing how you fold towels. And of course, my sisters and I fold the towels exactly the same way because we fold the towels the way our mother folded them, and my husband folds them very differently. And it's and it's just kind of like, is it wrong? Well, I think mine's more efficient because I don't have to unfold them and refold them to hang them on the towel rack. But it's not wrong. It's just like, okay, the towels are folded, they're put away. Why would I be complaining about it?
Exactly. As long as I'm not folding the towel, I do not care. That's true. And I think these tiny things build up over time, and then they become really big, and we think that they're major indicators of our marriage. And really, as long as we can just keep a sense of humor about those small things, I think they can stay where they belong, which is just some little annoying habit the spouse has.
Well, and one of the things is it can move past that. So when I tell people, if you can't let it go, if for something for some reason, because I have a colleague, he basically, in fact, it's how I met him, is because I read his blog post, and he was talking about the reason why he got divorced was because he left dishes in the sink. And I'm going, Matt, I love you, but that's not the reason why you got divorced. But that's what they were fighting about, because it
represents some bigger stuff.
Right. Which again is what you were recommending about you have those conversations that it's like, okay, it's like we're not fighting about the dishes on the sink, we're fighting about what they stand for. And as long as we stay, and it's like I tell people, if you can let it go, like my husband with the towels, it's like, you know what, they're folded, they're put away, I don't care. It's like, really, why would I be making a mountain out of this particular molehill?
And picking the hill you want to die on has been a huge part of kind of our journey. Is I tend to pick all the hills, which comes off as naggy, but I've really found out through a lot of soul searching that I'm trying to prevent my childhood full of divorces by not letting anything build up and become this bigger problem. But ironically, like I said earlier, that could cause its own problem because you don't want to be that person that picks every battle and cares about every small, nuance in the relationship too much. So that's been kind of a balance to work through.
Well, and I so love you talking about it being a balance, because it really is. And John Gottman, who's a big leader in the field, basically, and I don't know how he figured this out, but I trust that it's accurate. That he says 2/3 of all disagreements in a relationship will go unresolved. So obviously you got to figure out the 1/3 that matter. And it's like, okay, so, and I love that there's a focus on yourself. To go, okay, why does this matter? What is the deeper thing? And for children of divorce, it really is the fear of reliving that, especially if we're parents, because we don't want our kids to go through that.
Yeah, that's really hard. I was in, I think, the last year in our state where they allowed fully traditional custody schedules. So I was with my mom, all through the weeks, and then saw my dad every other weekend. And even though I had two great parents who actually did divorce pretty well after that, even that schedule and the new equivalence of the schedule is just so difficult for kids when it comes to stability and just everything else that goes into being a kid. So that's definitely a fear in the back of my mind all the time, is that idea of, and as a parent, not seeing my kids half the time, I think would be devastating. So all good motivators to communicate well.
Well, Alex, thanks so much for sharing this in your article. And can you please tell people where they can read more of your stuff? Because it's really good.
Oh, thank you. Sure. Yeah, I've been writing for Reader's Digest, so that's rd.com. And then also my own journalistic website. I do journalism writing, content writing, and blogging, which is alexandra-frost.com. So,
well, terrific.
And my contact is on there as well.
Great. So, as we've talked about, no matter how it happens, divorce really is painful for everyone involved, and its impact can last for a very long time. Children are not immune, but they can learn how to do marriage better, and in fact, everyone can. So my challenge to you is, will you learn and implement what works? And I know you're doing one of those things because you're listening to the show. So thanks so much for that, and until next week, stay loving.